Welcome to the Launch Capsule. With your host, James Dubos. Buckle up because your launch capsule begins now.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome to this episode of the Launch Capsule. I'm Jim Dubos. Today, we're going to focus on the 5 types of letter of intent responses that you may get in your business exit process. So let's get started because I think it's critical that you understand in the beginning stage what types of categories these are generally going to fall into, and it'll give you a sense of the seriousness, some of the structural considerations, and the contingencies that are going to be in each one of these offers. So offer 1 is what I'm going to describe as a serious and detailed offer. Another way to think about it is high intent. So it's generally going to be a strong, well-structured offer from a committed buyer. So these LOIs will have things like specific price, terms, the due diligence scope, and the seller role post-sale. So an example of something that you can think about, here's an expression. We are pleased to submit this LOI to acquire 100% of the equity of ABC Manufacturing for $7.5 million, structured as 80% cash at close and 20% in a 12-month seller note at 6% interest. This is a very specific offer. So you have key terms that are in this offer. $7.5 million total purchase price, 80% cash at close, 20% seller finance note at 6% paid over a specific term, 12 months, 45-day due diligence period, very specific, very short, $250,000 of earnest deposit, targeted closing for August 15, 2025. Seller remains as a consultant for 12 months. So if you think about that offer, here's some of the signals: high seriousness, alignment on value, and deal readiness. The other thing I would tell you is an example of another type. In this particular case, they had a 20% 12-month seller note. It might get replaced with an EBITDA, adjusted EBITDA target opportunity in the offer. And number 2 would be what I would call the exploratory offer. And it's really a moderate intent. So it's more loosely defined, interest-based response. A lot of these will lack specifics in valuation and terms. In a way, they're used to gain more information before committing to the actual transaction. So an example of this would be something like, we're interested in acquiring your business and believe it could fall within a valuation range of $4 to $6 million, depending upon further due diligence. So the first thing I would say is in the key terms, they're giving you a specific value range, 4 to 6. 60-day preliminary due diligence period, so it's not specific, it could extend. No deposit or binding terms in this offer. Subject to internal investment committee approval. No defined closing date. So the signals that you're picking up here is that they're curiosity driven, but they're really not ready to transact. So it's something just to highlight these types of offers because you'll see them. Offer 3 is what I call the lowball, or sometimes referred to as a strategic offer. Really low intent, or there's a alternative strategic motive. They generally are offers with significant lower value. Generally, these are offers with significant lower value, unfavorable terms, and quite frankly, designed to gather intelligence. Another way to think about it might be an offer from an opportunistic buyer or even a competitor. An example of this would be, we propose to purchase your company's core assets for $1.5 million. This includes your customer lists, inventory, and equipment, but excludes liabilities or personnel. So the key terms here, $1.5 million, significantly below your market value. The asset-only deal excludes liabilities and, quite frankly, your people. 90-day due diligence period, no employment or consulting relationship for the seller, a right to withdraw at any time during diligence. The signal is honestly minimal intent to close a fair deal. Move along. Offer number 4 would be what I call the conditional offer. And it's got major contingencies in this type of an offer. So generally, the offer is going to depend on heavily external events, things like financing, maybe board approvals, third-party relationships. There's a lot of uncertainty to the deal process. So an example that I could use to express this would be, we are interested in acquiring ABC Services for $6 million contingent upon the successful closing of our Series B funding expected within 75 days. So here's some key terms. $6 million purchase price. It's contingent upon their getting funding, which is not yet closed. Requires a favorable outcome from interviews with top 3 clients. Vendor contract renewals must be secured. No deposit until contingencies are met. So the signals are, there is legitimate interest here, but the deal is far from secure because they don't truly have the funding yet to actually make the acquisition happen, along with some nuance around clients and vendors. So you need to be very careful and consider, is this going to create a wall, if you will, to getting the deal closed? And then the last, number 5, what I call the creative or non-traditional offer. And it's really a strategic structuring of an offer. So it's innovative. They may have some equity swaps, could be a merger with an existing entity, earnouts, or performance-based payouts. It's generally more complex, but potentially higher upside. So here's an example of how that might get expressed. We propose a merger of ABC Co. with our platform business. You would receive 1.5 times your trailing 12-month EBITDA, totaling approximately $5.1 million in value. The key terms in an offer like this might be 1.5 times EBITDA, $5.1 million in cash. So what you would receive is 50% cash at close, 25% equity in the merged entity, 25% performance-based earnout over 2 years. Seller joins as EVP with equity vesting. So the signal here is strategic long-term alignment in growth-focused partnership. Now look, these types of examples hopefully give you a sense of what's going to come at you when you're in the middle of the LOI process and you're beginning to receive the widely disparate types of letters and contents. I can tell you that is why in the very beginning, you go back to why am I selling, and you really define what you want to see happen, not just for yourself, but for your company before you start this process, so that you can do an alignment between the outcomes of evaluation of why you're doing what you're doing with the contents of the letter of intent, so that you can determine, okay, what is the best fit for the company and for the outcomes that I was originally establishing for myself. Now, I want to talk a little bit about these offers because a lot of times what I see is these have the most upside potential, particularly for owners who want to stay involved or engaged for some period of time. And so this equity swap idea, if you believe that the company still has growth potential and you see an opportunity to roll your equity into the newly merged entity, that gives you upside opportunity. It also gives you a reduction in the taxable event because you're no longer cashing in that portion of the equity for capital, for cash. So that portion, let's say that 25% that you roll over, will not be taxed at the moment of the transaction. So it's a very interesting component for owners who are going to stay involved, have some role moving forward for some period of time. And this is where we get into a little bit of the meat and potatoes around your employment agreements and contingencies. What types of stock is the equity going to be? Is it going to be common versus some preferred stock? So there are elements to consider when you look at a form of an equity, I'll say, rollover. Okay, now I want to give you some concrete examples from my own 7 exits. The first transaction that I experienced had a cash offer, cash up front, and it had a 2-year earnout period. Now, I'll tell you that particular company was a private equity venture capital backed company. And 2 years is a very long time for any new owner to leave alone a business to operate, because in many cases, what will happen, and what happened in this particular case, is we began to have goal conflict between the things that I wanted to do and needed to do in the business. I had sold the company, but because I still had a long trailing financial interest in the business, we began to have conflict between corporate direction and local direction. And so I would tell most entrepreneurs to not make your earnout periods more than 12 months, because a longer period starts to create a barrier for some of the progress that any form of a venture capital, private equity, or even a strategic buyer is going to want to make in the business. Now, another example of an equity type swap, in one of the transactions, we basically generated stock options in the newly formed entity. And when we were acquired by another entity, generating additional stock options in the new company, that particular new company went public, and all of the employee community that I was responsible for entered into a formal vesting program, generating millions and millions of dollars for the employee community as part of that journey. And so the equity swap and the stock option component in that particular business was a dramatic life-changing opportunity for the employee community that really took advantage of the stock option program and the vesting and the ability to capitalize as they earned or vested into the options. And so that's another example in my own experience that can benefit not just the owner, but also the employee community at large. The last thing I would say is that the vast majority of the offers that have these innovative or trailing 12-month earnouts typically will provide at the end a greater value if you execute effectively than what you would receive in just a pure cash offer. And so I hope this was helpful to you. Please reach out to me, entrepreneurship@dubos.me. I'm happy to answer any questions for you, and I'll see you on the journey here. Have an awesome day.
That's a wrap for today's episode of The Launch Capsule. With your host and mentor to success, James Dubos. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share.